Today we're very excited to present on using your checkout experience to drive conversion. This is something that's near and dear to our hearts at Bolt, and we're excited today to share some of our learnings in terms of what we've seen at checkout and how to really maximize conversion at the bottom of funnel. So we'll do intros, we'll talk about why checkout's important, then we'll dive into real site optimization strategies, some tangible takeaways from mobile commerce and in general, and then open the floor to Q&A. And to kick it off, we're really honored to have Shirley working with us here, who's a senior product manager at Bolt. And Shirley, I'll let you give a little bit of background about yourself before we dive in.
Yeah, so hi everyone, nice to meet you. I was previously at Uber working on the B2B team on Uber for Business. I was leading growth and retention efforts at Bolt, been here for a little bit and working on the checkout application, so the core products around conversion.
Awesome. Thank you, Shirley. And quick intro on myself, founder and CEO of Bolt. And what we are is we are a checkout platform as a service. So for everything bottom of funnel, post intent to purchase from checkout to payments to fraud to everything it touches, that's what we do. So to kind of frame the discussion today, why is checkout important? And we all know on the call how much more difficult it is to get customers to pay attention to your brand. There's a lot more noise. There are a lot more channels, but cost per click has been growing at a rate of about 20% year over year. And when you have a customer on your site and they found the product that they wanted, they've created an intent to purchase, they found it in the right size and the right color and in inventory in stock, and they've clicked checkout, they now have an intent to complete a purchase. And losing them at that finish line is we call it a tragedy, right? Plain and simple, because you're not just leaving that order on the line, you're leaving that customer's lifetime value who may come back and shop at your store multiple times, who may end up referring their friends. And if you lose them at the finish line, they may be going to a competitor and driving all of that value there. So capturing everyone who's at the finish line, we think is one of the most important things you could do to couple with a strong top of funnel strategy. So I'll let Shirley talk a little bit about the conversion funnel here and some of the stats around that.
Yeah, so following up what Brian said, putting checkout in context, obviously making a purchase on e-commerce websites includes a lot, including attracting new visitors, getting them through, finding the product, adding the product to the cart. And at the last step, it is the finish line. Bainbridge Institute research estimates that the cart abandonment rate is around 70%. So that's pretty high for some pretty high intent users. And in general, there's industry standards around what is best practices for checkout. Payments produces a checkout conversion index, and most retailers average a 50.9 out of 100 rate. And the index is created out of things including like speed, usability, average order value. And so this tells you that most retailers have a lot to do to reach the best kind of checkout experience.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that, Shirley. And where we get that 70% drop off, if you look at the add to cart versus with a transaction number 14.5 versus 3.3, this is the drop off that we're talking about. So I'll go next. So what we're going to do is, instead of just talking about the problem of checkout and why it's so important, we've run hundreds of A/B test experiments on what actually works better with checkout. We've done a ton of research, and what we're going to do is do a quick lightning round where we'll spend 10-20 seconds per tip and go through some real tangible quick tips and tricks to improve your site's checkout conversion rate. So Shirley is going to run with this, and Shirley, I'll pass the baton off to you here.
Sounds good. So next slide. First, checkout starts not with necessarily when you click the checkout button, but right before. And oftentimes the shopping cart is where checkout has the initial steps. And a lot of people make mistakes of adding too much to the shopping cart page and creating a lot of clutter. We want to make it a priority to guide people to even begin the checkout. And so an example that you can see on this page, there's a lot of upsells, there's a lot of donations, there's notifications and call outs to join other things. And all of it is a distraction to the checkout button, which is on the bottom right, if you can see it underneath the total. So where possible, you want to remove promotions, upsells, introduce them logically in the flow, perhaps only doing upsells with products that make sense, or introduce an interstitiary, and use color and text sizes to guide users. You want to frame the information hierarchy so that the checkout button is the #1 thing that people can see when they're scanning the page. Next slide.
I love that. So important.
All right, another thing you can do is simplifying fields. So in e-commerce, friction is the enemy of the order completion rate. The higher the friction is, the lower your conversion rate will be. So here's an example from a major retailer. You can see that the shipping address and the payment billing addresses are all out there, and there's a lot of fields that you can reuse between the two. First name, last name, address, phone number, and you'll see that this retailer thought to use my shipping address, but it's not by default checked, and so it could be very easily missed, and people will often scan through and be overwhelmed by the number of forms that they have to fill. So a couple of tips and common mistakes we've seen here is, use the credit card number to detect the type instead of asking for whether it's Visa or a MasterCard. And use the shipping name as the credit card name and use the shipping address as the billing address. That helps the users take out a few steps in the flow and makes it look like a shorter conversion funnel.
This is great. And even more important on mobile when, scrolling is even potentially more punitive.
Another thing you can do is help users estimate costs up front. And users have indicated in surveys that this is the #1 reason for cart abandonment is when they begin the checkout process starting from the cart page. It is a different cost than once they finish the process because of taxes or shipping fees. And so you want to give a best estimated total. In this example over here, you can see that they put in a default shipping option, and tax is laid out and indicates that it hasn't been quite calculated yet. And so some tricks that you can do here is you can try to estimate what the shipping and the taxes will be based on the user's browser location. And you can give a little bit guess here and indicate that it might change later depending on the shipping address. You also want to offer free shipping where possible. In these days with Amazon, where everyone is used to 2-day free shipping, this is a big differentiator, and hidden shipping costs really adds up and causes large cart abandonment later. And something here too is a lot of retailers, as they're offering in-store shipping pickup as an option for e-commerce, they often introduce it at the product page, but don't forget to introduce it later when their users are choosing shipping options as well, so that they can have a type of free shipping if you cannot afford free shipping.
And Shirley, how do you recommend, offering free shipping obviously comes at a big cost. How do you recommend deciding if that cost is a worthwhile ROI?
That's a great question. Looking at average order value is a great way of understanding if free shipping is valuable. And you'll also want to see where you're shipping to. If most of your orders are within the United States, you can reasonably offer free shipping. But if you're going international, the cost may not be able to average out over your orders.
Makes sense.
All right. Avoid the login wall is another thing that we see pretty often. Usually this happens right between clicking checkout on the cart page to before adding the billing address. And users, this makes sense because retailers see a lot of value from getting shoppers come back to making a second purchase. However, it is very, very much a barrier for users who are first time making a purchase. And so best practices here is to add a guest checkout and then use the information that you created to follow up with creating an account later. And usually when you're creating a guest account, you can get the information like email or phone number, use that as a way of following up either through email or even a screen at the end of completing the checkout to create an account using that email that you've already collected. And
This
then
is great.
and if the first step is already asking users to add an email address, you can use that email address to dynamically detect if the user already has an account on your site, and then at that time ask them to log in.
Yeah, I think that's totally the right way to go. There's studies that show that this page, even if there is a continuous guest button, it produces a 40% drop in conversion. 40% of customers will just drop off at this login wall step because it's too confusing. It's too much friction, even visually. So, we would even recommend removing this entirely. And as Shirley said, you can ask for email address as part of your guest checkout flow. And you could see if that email address is already registered and then ask them to log in. And we are big proponents of post-checkout registration. So after you have their email and all of their information, you can ask them at the end to create a password for future transactions or authenticate in some fashion, which eliminates or avoids that 40% drop off at the beginning of checkout, which nobody wants. So this is a big one that I think we see way too frequently. And in terms of account, another thing we encourage is, what is the account valuable for? Do you want to be able to market to them over email? Well, then you already have their email address, so you don't need them to create an account for it. Or do you want them to be able to track their orders? Well, there's a way to do that without having an email and password. So, really understanding what the account is for, I think is so important.
And the last tip we have here is around optimizing site performance. So for poor site performance not only leads to longer checkout, but adds to lack of frustration and lack of trust. A lot of our users have given feedback that, they leave the payment step most often when suddenly it errors out or there's a redirect to another site that asks them to enter in their payment information. All of that leads to lack of trust and high abandonment rates. And so quick tips, this is more on the engineering side, cache the latest version of your pages, minimize style sheets in JavaScript, trim the JavaScript parsing, reduce page redirects, compress images, and use a CDN. We have more tips available on both resources, but all of this is all about optimizing your site performance, and not only for checkout, but overall your e-commerce site platform.
Awesome. Okay, lightning round complete. Now we'll talk a bit, do a little bit of a deep dive into mobile e-commerce, and how to optimize your mobile checkout experience. Maybe before we dive into that, Shirley, why is mobile so important for e-commerce sites in general?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. If we move to the next slide, we have a little bit of stats on why e-commerce is so important. It is up and poised for further growth. This graph, you can see that mobile as a share of e-commerce is as high as 70% in 2020. This is projection, so we'll see what it looks like by the end of the year. And the global e-commerce sales that are coming through mobile is in the trillions. So all of this is showing that more and more users are using mobile in order to shop. However, the mobile conversion rates are lower than desktop. So that points to a little bit of opportunity that we can try to do in order to get mobile conversion to be as high as desktop.
Absolutely. And I think one other thing, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, Shirley, that I've seen is, when folks think about mobile, sometimes they think about native mobile. But unless, you're Amazon, it's very difficult to get consumers to sign up for an app to shop on your site. It's high friction, and it's only going to be one or two of the biggest shops in the world that are going to be able to drive that behavior, unless you have like an amazing loyalty program or something like that. So a huge chunk of this number, the vast majority, is actually coming through mobile web. and that oftentimes has some of the least, as the least investment in terms of user experience, etc. So Shirley, is that something you've seen as well?
Yeah, that's definitely true. We are seeing more and more retailers creating native apps, and the downloads are, as Ryan pointed to, not as high as like the Amazons. And so for those customers, it's all about growing the brand. For most smaller retailers, it is important to make it mobile first and mobile friendly, so that when users are browsing through the mobile sites, they can see something that's good.
Yep, definitely. And if you're driving, users from ads or through social, they're likely going to be on a mobile device, and that mobile web experience needs to feel as close to a native experience as possible.
Yeah, exactly. And something to point out here too is the difference between mobile shoppers versus desktop shoppers. Because of the format that you're using to shop, it changes their behaviors a lot. And that could lead to a lot of the reasons why conversion is lower on mobile versus desktop. There's more mistakes happening from fat fingering and harder to reach form fields. So you can imagine people browsing with one hand. It's a lot harder to kind of browse and then actually complete the checkout when you have a smaller device and smaller tap targets on your website. You also get a lack of context due to limited screen space. When you only have such a small amount of real estate, you can only show so much information. It's a lot easier to overwhelm mobile shoppers with too much information. And some of the user experience best practices that you do on mobile is actually opposite of what you would do for desktop. And I'll show you guys an example later on. And going back to site speed that we had talked about performance, it's much worse on mobile because you're often on, you might not be on Wi-Fi, you might be on an LTE, or something else about the performance makes it a lot slower. And bigger files will make it harder for a smaller screen space to load.
That makes a lot of sense. Shirley, you mentioned mobile first, and I know a lot of folks in this space use that phrase pretty frequently. Mm-hmm. And then I think some companies are desktop first, where they have a comprehensive checkout on desktop, and mobile is a very just lightweight version that is secondary in terms of the investment it receives.
Yes.
So what do you think is the right approach in terms of what should be your predominant flow?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of retailers now understand, there is something you can do to make a desktop site mobile friendly. And that's the common thread. Most people are making their sites mobile friendly. However, depending on your traffic, if you have, over 50% of your users coming through mobile, it is worth investing time in building a site that is mobile first as well, to optimize a little bit better for that segment of users, especially since they have a lower conversion rate. There might be something there to get them, past the checkout line with some optimizations there. And so if you go to the next slide, I have an example of Macy's. Basically, they have a site that is mobile friendly in the sense that, everything is laid out fine, like the width is there, the buttons are like full width, so it has good tap targets, but it's definitely not mobile first because this is just one product page for buying hotel sheets. And you can see that in order to understand everything that's happening here, you have to process a lot of information, and it's very unclear once you've purchased the right sheet or not. Not sure if you can tell, but the 4 different screenshots here is displaying 3 different variations of that one sheet. So it's a very complex product that doesn't translate, that probably works fine on desktop, but does not translate well on mobile. And so this is one example where you'd unintuitively have to make a mobile first approach of designing this product page to be multi-step product selection, as opposed to just having it in a one-page scroll. And other things that you want to happen that is more important to happen on mobile is, allow users to view and edit the configurations from the cart, because they have such complex configurations. It's harder to flip back to this and then go through the multi-step process to configure the product that they want to check out. And use the product images that reflects the final output that they have. I actually was buying these Macy's sheets, and the product page that was in the cart was these white sheets, even though I wanted the tan ones. And so that causes a lot of mistrust and confusion over completing checkout on mobile.
that makes a lot of sense. It amazes me that a company like, Macy's, which has been around for so long and is such a incredible brand, has a product page on mobile like this,
Yeah.
which, just when you look at it, just is like intuitively very high friction and impossible to complete. Um,
Yeah, and I think
and
it goes back to what you're saying, Ryan, is like, maybe Macy's doesn't have a lot of mobile traffic yet. And so mobile friendly is enough. But as more traffic that they might be getting comes from mobile, they will have to go towards a mobile first approach.
Yeah, definitely. And something I think, Shirley, I've heard you talk about a lot is like above the fold, right? I think the Gen Z generation and kind of the up and coming online shoppers are, they have very low attention span, and they want everything to be quick and instant and easy and feel like TikTok,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And this is like the opposite of that.
Yes.
So great. What else do we have?
Yeah, so another thing we see in mobile shoppers is that they're more likely to do comparison shopping. So Ryan, you mentioned this before, but basically when you're browsing on mobile, you don't have like a space that you can easily go to and review everything in your cart. And so a lot of people use the cart and checkout page as the browser comparison. So we see like more people adding things to the cart and then removing them later. In this case, it's way more important for you to give them a save for later or remove options in order to streamline the checkout. And that helps a lot with first-time shoppers because they might not know your products very well and they're not familiar with all the options yet. And so building this in straight from the cart page will help not only give you, not only help the first-time shopper, get to checkout faster, but will also give you ammunition to tell them to come back later because you know what they're already interested in.
Yeah, I love this. I think wish lists and saved lists are really great in concept, but if they're siloed, users aren't going to, once again, have the attention span to use them and remember where they are. And so I like this concept of the cart is king. And, even on Amazon, when you have a wish list or item saved for later, when you go to your cart, it shows you your cart, but then it shows you those items right underneath. So you could just pop them up very easily and you don't have to go to a separate page for your wish list or saved items.
Exactly. Another thing that we see exclusively on mobile is keyboard defaults. So you guys have all probably seen the different kinds of keyboards that sometimes show up. There's the text keyboard and there's the numbers keyboard. So you want to set your form fields to the right type so that the number keyboard versus the text keyboards come up, and that will help with things like credit card entry. Something default in Apple and in Android actually is that with the keyboards, they have autofill enabled. And so you can see the screenshot of like me using my Face ID, and that automatically pre-fills my credit card numbers. We've done audits of sites before, and this doesn't work well on all shopper sites. And finally, there's actually a card input type that lets you use the native card scanning feature built into iOS and Android. This is relatively new technology, but essentially, if you've ever used like Uber or one of the, like the apps that let you scan a credit card, it's natively built into the phone today. And so if you use advantage of this input field type, then you can also let your website really easily have this card scanning technology without building it yourself.
Yep. And, there's so much of what's accessible native now in the browsers too. So, there are different libraries and JavaScript packages that will allow you access to native Android, native iOS motions and gestures and just real, card scanning and all of these great features. That makes such a big difference, right? To go to a card number field and be able to autofill from your saved numbers, or be able to type your big numbers and not just like the tiny numbers at the top when you have your full keyboard out. Once again, like friction and, it sounds like Shirley is just like anything you can do to remove friction, you should do, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And use advantage of the form factor that your shoppers are coming to.
Yep, definitely.
And the other thing that we want to encourage, and this is true for both mobile and desktop, but more so for mobile because fat fingering and accidental mistakes is a lot easier, is to check for errors. For example, use the Google Address API to create pre-formatted address. The type ahead works well in two ways. One, because it saves you some space when you're creating a form, so it appears to be a shorter form. And the second thing is that if you can use an address from Google, it's already formatted in the ways that you need with, billing, zip code, city, all those details. And the second level of validation you can do on addresses is to look for whether if this is like a residential address or a business address. There's a lot of libraries out there that can help you with this. It not only helps you format the address correctly, but make sure that you're putting in a deliverable address. And so that saves you some support headache later. And finally, you can use same kind of smart checking for credit card numbers to see that if it's a valid credit card number without running it by the payment systems first. This will help you avoid errors or help the users avoid errors in the cases where they are maybe still not using that keyboard or the card scanning feature that we had mentioned previously.
This is so great. And do you recommend, checking for errors at the end when all the information is entered so you don't stop the user, or kind of giving them real-time inline feedback?
Yeah, that's a good question. We believe in giving real-time feedback so that users have context to correct the errors. If you wait until the end of the form, then they might have forgotten what they were already filling in beforehand and not notice, which part is the actual error. So dynamic feedback is the best.
That's great.
Great. So here's like a summary of all the things that we kind of talked about: remove distractions, simplify, provide all information up front, avoid the login wall, and optimize for speed. And the final thing is, build mobile first, not just mobile friendly. All of this, of course, depends on your unique user type and your situation. So do take this, always A/B test and make sure that what you're building is right for your shoppers.
Such great takeaways. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is go through a quick Bolt demo. Because at Bolt, we love giving advice on how to improve your own checkout experience, but in the case that, you want a partner to have us do this for you and leverage our years and years of development and perfecting checkout, we're open for business. So I'm sharing my screen here. And also, by the way, just a reminder, feel free, Q&A. You could hit the chat room and message to Q&A, and we'll get to those questions at the end of this presentation. So Bagley Mishka is full customer. We're going to go through the checkout experience here, and I'll buy a printed shirt dress. And so here's their cart page. When you've added an item to your cart, now you'll notice they have a few different options: checkout, international checkout, checkout the firm, PayPal checkout. Some are not supported natively within the Bolt checkout button yet, but are coming, PayPal firm included. But the good thing about this is that it's overtly clear what you need to do next. Checkout is kind of at the top, big and bold and blue. So I'm going to click checkout here. So the great thing about Bolt checkout is that if it recognizes my device and my cookie, then my information is already there and ready to go. So it's literally a one-click checkout experience. So that's what you guys are seeing here, because I use Bolt all the time, and my transaction's done. Shirley didn't mention this in some of the tips, but you want to give your repeat customers the easiest experience, and Bolt has this one-click functionality and handles all the authentication to make it passwordless, secure, but totally frictionless. I'm going to click guest checkout. and clear my checkout just to show you what starting from scratch will look like. And so we're starting from scratch here. I'm going to type in my email here. I'm going to type in my phone number, my name. And if you notice here, the phone number says it's invalid because we know that the person has typed in a fake phone number. So I'm going to type in a real phone number and then continue with my company information. So company name, we accept company name. It knows that I've been here before. I'm going to continue anyway. Select my shipping options. Free shipping is by default, which is great. And now I enter my card number and click pay. So a few different things you'll notice on this site to kind of relate it to the presentation that we just went through with Shirley. But one is just how fast every step loads. Most checkouts need to reload each incremental step, and it's a whole new page and a whole new DOM, and takes seconds potentially per step. Bolt loads instantaneously. This is powered in a modal and is a progressive web app. So we're doing a bunch of pre-rendering of our different JavaScript and development assets so that when the user clicks the next action, it's happening instantaneously. If you'll notice as well, the page is not a new page. It stays on the same page. So it's centered to the user's line of sight. We mask the page around it, but show a little transparency to keep the user comfortable that they're still on the same site. So it's just a more compact, simple experience. And what I'll go ahead and do as well is I'm going to go ahead and exit the checkout experience here and show everybody what it looks like on mobile. So I'm going to my cart page, clicking the bright blue Bolt checkout button, and the transaction is ready to go, has all my information, and the mobile is everything's above the fold, right? So you're not scrolling. There's no scrolling required for any step of the checkout experience. It's all happening above the fold in the user's line of sight on a mobile device. So we've really optimized this experience for mobile as well, and all of the different checklist items that Shirley has mentioned is all packed into this out of the box to have the ultimate checkout experience. So. And great. So now we're going to open the floor up to questions. Please post your questions in the Q&A chat, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible.
Awesome. So I see Sean has posted a few questions. Should I start with those?
Right. Let's do it.
All right. Okay, so first one is, have you seen much with regards to multiple levels of free shipping? Spend 50, get free USPS, spend 100, get free FedEx 2-day. So no, we actually haven't tested too many of different shipping levels, but from general practice, the idea behind offering free shipping isn't necessarily like trying the different types. It's more that knowing the price up front will help you make your decision for purchasing the product faster. And the differences between the more complicated that you make the shipping option and the shipping, the total cost calculation, the higher friction it brings to the user. And so I think like simple, different like date plus price options is generally the best practice here.
Yeah, that's great. And a lot of this also depends on your ability to A/B test, and sometimes it's hard to get the transactional volume to do a proper A/B test. But if you do own a store with a high enough number of transactions per month in the thousands or tens of thousands, then you could start conducting A/B tests where you display different messaging and different offers and see your difference in cost, but also your difference in conversion, and decide what the right ROI is for your business. So Sean, I'll answer your second question and then we'll go to Jay. And so Sean says, I see all the studies that a half a second increase load time significantly decreases conversion rates. Does this actually hold true on smaller sites? Is there a practical limit? Once you're at 2 seconds, for instance, does going much faster than that really help that much? Shirley.
Yeah, so this is a really good question. I think I want to go back to the spirit of why we care about faster checkout. And I think like what you alluded to, it's not about just like taking the whole checkout and making it shorter. That doesn't automatically lead to a better conversion rate. It's all about kind of taking a deeper analysis into, why your checkout is taking a long time. To give an example, we deep dive into mobile here, and mobile checkouts are slower because the page like page load times might be a lot slower. And so if you're looking at your users and you see a lot of mobile traffic coming in, let's say through the payments that's done, that's where you want to focus your optimizations on, is making your payments faster. Maybe you're integrating with PayPal or a lot of alternative payments and the calls are taking too long. That's where you want to optimize a little bit of your front end and stuff to make the checkout faster. And then the second example I can think of is, in that Macy's example I gave about complex product customizations. Well, when you're on the cart page and your images are loading slowly, it's hard to do comparison shopping. And so you want to increase the time it takes to load that comparison shopping page so that users can go through. So I think you're asking the right question here, which is like time isn't the only thing that matters. It matters like how you're reducing that time and the reasons why different parts of your checkout process is taking so long.
Great, thank you for that, Shirley, and for the question, Sean. So Jay's question, are you planning any features that would allow us to email the user a link that will take them directly back to their Bolt checkout?
Yeah, on this one, I'll have to check back with the team. Ryan, do you know the answer to this
Yeah,
one?
I can take, yeah, so the answer to Jay is yes, we are. We call it, checkout via link, and it's actually a pretty complex feature because it needs to connect with your shopping cart, and there's a lot of integration work, but we're investing heavily into this so that your abandoned cart emails can take a user directly back to a pre-populated checkout that's one click to complete, or your customer service can produce checkout links. So the answer is yes, and I think it's about a couple months out, and we can obviously follow up if you want a specific timeline there.
I see Sean had another question about Google autocomplete, so I can answer that one too. And yes, we do see people forgetting to put in their apartment number, which is why we recommend combining that with the USPS address validation, where they'll tell you if the location type is a residential one, and you'll want to ask and prompt for a apartment number. And there's also ways of looking if it's a business address too, then they need to enter in the floor number or the name of the company.
Great, thank you, Shirley. So Matt has a question. He says, have you found anxiety from Bolt users who have their credit card data stored in your system, like an Amazon account? Do they trust Amazon, but most likely have not yet heard of Bolt, and maybe asking the question, who is a third party storing my data? So I'm happy to take that one, and then Shirley, feel free to fill any gaps here. We've tested this extensively, and we haven't found any anxiety from users. After launching this feature, we're expecting some questions from users to come in, and the reason why is that we're really putting the merchant's brand front and center. So when the users log back in, it's, you've shopped here before, and the site is secured by Bolt, and we've securely stored your data for a faster future purchase. So we haven't gotten any user complaints, and in fact, the opposite. I think users are just relieved that there's a secure service that is storing their data for single-click checkout. Another important thing here is that in order for us to store your data, you actually have to opt into it at the end of checkout. So there's a checkbox that says, save your information with Bagley Misha in a Bolt secured account, and the user has to actually check that box in order for it to work the second time around. So they've opted in and likely have some memory of doing that the next time they are logged into our checkout. So thanks for that question, Matt. And then another question is, are you planning on adding more transparency in your dashboard reporting so we can see each drop within the Bolt checkout flow? And not sure if we can track that with GA of Google Analytics. And I'll take that one too. The answer is yes. We currently already have a checkout funnel in our merchant dashboard where you can see each step of checkout and the fall off there, but it's a simple view. And we're working over the next 3 to 4 months. It's a big push in Q2 and beginning of Q3 on deeper checkout analytics visible to everyone in your Bolt merchant dashboard. So anything to add there, Shirley?
Oh, that sounds right.
Okay, perfect. Amy's question, I noticed that Bolt doesn't require a billing address in your checkout form. Can you talk about why you've chosen to omit this field? Shirley, you want to take that?
Yeah, so really good on noticing this one. So we've done a lot of fraud analysis over, requirements of having the billing address in our checkout form. And we found that the majority of the time with our fraud algorithms, we can omit this field from the credit card entirely. There's two reasons for this. First is that we're already collecting your shipping address. And so for the majority of shoppers, the shipping address is always the same as the billing address. And then in the cases where they're not the same, the biggest reason why you want a billing address for your credit card is things like zip code is like actually one of the most essential parts of it. That's what credit card companies use to detect whether you have your card on you in order to detect fraud or not. But because of Bolt's proprietary fraud detection systems, we haven't really needed that field. And so it removes an extra friction step from the checkout process by not requiring users to enter in the billing address.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's very hard to omit this if you're not in close coordination with a highly sophisticated fraud engine and your payment processor, because removing billing address will increase your checkout conversion rate, but it will hurt your auth rates with your payment processor. And if you don't have a sophisticated fraud provider, then it could really hinder their performance. So because Bolt does all of the above and monitors auth rates and is the industry's leading fraud engine because of all the behavioral data we track, we're able to make that ROI trade-off and say billing address actually helps with conversion way more than it hurts with fraud certainty and remove it. So that's another big perk of using the Bolt platform. Thank you everyone for the questions, for attending the session. Thank you so much, Shirley, for lending us your expertise and the Bolt team for putting this together. So we'll hand it back off.
Yeah, guys, that was awesome. I think Noah and I have a couple of questions for you guys, if you don't mind hanging for a second.
Please.
Yeah, that was awesome, guys. Really loved you guys walking through kind of the logic behind Bolt right there. It was great. I'm just curious, obviously what we're doing at Bolt, it's not a static technology. It's a dynamic one. We're constantly changing it, constantly upgrading it. Curious to know from both of you guys, what new features are you guys most excited about that we're going to be rolling out in the next few quarters?
Sure, I can go first. So one of the things I'm really excited about is, thinking about not just increasing conversion as kind of like a standard, but thinking about how to personalize the checkout conversion for each individual retailer. And so little things like, knowing if your customers are more business addresses or residential addresses can help us make that checkout form a little bit more customized. And it's something that can happen, like what we'd like is a checkout that evolves not only with your customer type, but with the seasonality that comes and any other events. I mean, COVID is a really good example of how it's changed how retailers have looked and what their customer makeup has looked like. Now, imagine if our checkout could be optimized and changes as it goes, changes as these environmental parameters are changing too. So we're working on a proof of concept for this in the coming months, and I'm super excited about that. It means that, we're no longer talking about a static checkout page, but something that's truly changing with the times and with your users.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, Ryan, as you know, I get this question all the time and I could probably answer it, but I'd love to hear your answer on it. And I'm sure there's folks that were in the chat, maybe thinking this, larger retailers with large tech teams, but why Bolt over building this yourself?
Well, the simple answer is that this is really hard to build yourself, right? And everyone on this call knows how complex checkout is, because when you click checkout, that checkout needs to talk with, your tax calculation service, your shipping provider, your coupon engine, discount engine, your gift card provider, email newsletter. It needs to handle, payment processors and fraud engines and user authentication. And by the time you're done implementing a checkout stack, you have dozens and dozens of unique integrations that make it very fragile. So then the problem becomes, okay, well, I want to try and innovate on checkout. And now you have to change things or integrate a new service, and it breaks everything. And that's why most retailers kind of get to a checkout that works and they never touch it, because all the integrations make it extremely fragile and hard to maintain. So when you partner with a platform like Bolt, which is the world's first checkout platform, all the integrations go into the Bolt core, and that makes it extremely reliable to upgrade over time. So if you want to try a new tax engine or new shipping engine or new payment processors or new connection points, it will just work. And then we can use that solid foundation to innovate on the front end and optimize UI, optimize performance, optimize display. So I just say it's really hard and really expensive to do this yourself. It's so important from a conversion standpoint. And we found a ton of retailers of all sizes, from millions in GMV to billions now, who have said it makes much more sense to partner here.
Can you write that down for me next time? I've got that in my notebook.
We need to record that.
There we go.
No, that was awesome. One thing that we touched on a little bit was the single click functionality. And obviously I know the answer to this, but I think it's really exciting. And one of the main reasons why I joined Bolt, I think our vision of trying to get to a place where every transaction online is a single click, just talking about how we're doing in terms of building that network.
We're doing really well. We didn't have the single click network until recently, and we wanted to make sure from a data security, user experience standpoint, it was where it needed to be before we launched it. And we launched it 6 months ago, and now over 15% of all of our transactions are happening through single click accounts.
Nice.
And it's just getting started. And we found that 60% of people opt in to create accounts at the end of checkout with no hindrance in conversion. And we also found that if people have an account or have gone through our checkout once before, they have a 57% higher chance of conversion versus guest checkouts. So,
much higher.
57% higher conversion rate. The login walls, maybe 2 or 3% of customers will register. Now you have a 60% registration rate. And that network is only continuing to grow. So really the vision here is that single click Amazon-like experience for your site for all of your users, and then eventually a larger network of merchants that's opting into it as well. But for getting the network, even for your own users, it's incredibly valuable for them to be able to opt in without a password in a friction-free way and come back and single click checkout at your store. Makes a big difference.